Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing threading, and a whole lot of people have asked me for more detailed explanations of some of the things I'm doing. So I'm going to try and explain start to finish every last detail that's involved in threading. So in order to cut this thread, I have to set my compound rest at exactly 29.5 degrees, and we're going to get into exactly why that is today. But I just wanted to prove a point. If you look down here, I have graduations on my compound rest, and this came with this crooked little line over here, which is, well, this is dialed in perfectly right now. So, and there are keys underneath this thing, so it is locating against this T-slot underneath. And anyways, if I was to use the line that this thing came with, I would be off by nearly a degree. And so the first thing I did when I brought this thing home was get it dialed in. So I got it dialed in, and then I made a new mark, which is exactly aligned with the 0 on the graduations on the base of this thing. So don't trust anything. That's my point here. The stuff, you know, that we're buying these days, even the stuff you buy 30 years ago that was made in the USA, none of it was perfect. It's on you to make sure that all these things are going to work properly. Now that I know I can trust this thing, because I know I just had to refresh myself on which line did I make, the straight one or the crooked one, and turns out I made the straight one. So now I'm going to go ahead and set this to 29.5 degrees, and then we're going to go talk about why we're doing that.
Okay.
So guys, just picture these are things that you're going to thread. We're doing a 60-degree thread in here, and now you could imagine, let's say you were at 31.5 degrees, because the nominal would be 30 degrees. But the reason we go with 29.5 is this. If I was cutting in at 30.5 or 31 degrees, I would get this sort of stepping effect. Now I am exaggerating it, but you would be getting this effect as you threaded farther and farther in with every pass. With the 29.5 degrees, I'm not feeding here, I'm actually kind of feeding here. And so what that does is it makes each of these steps overlap in the other direction, and the end result is that you're always scraping. So every time you go in with the insert, you're scraping. So if this was your second last cut, your last cut would be ever so slightly over here like this, and then the majority of the cut would be over here. But you're not leaving a step by going 29.5, you're always scraping the back side of that thread. So that's why I do that. So we've got our tool compound rest set at 29.5 degrees, and we went over that. I've got a piece of 1-inch stock. I just turned something a little bigger down. We're going to cut a 1-inch 8 threads per inch thread today, so I've got that in my chuck. The next thing I want to do is dial in my threading tool so that the 60-degree it's cutting is perfectly perpendicular to the axis of the machine. So I've got my tool dialed in. It's pretty darn close to 0. I mean, in the distance that it's going to be cutting it, for all intents and purposes, bang on 0. If you notice up here, I've written the center height of my lathe between centers from the center from the bed up, it's this random number, and center from the table up, it's this random number. So I'm going to just make sure that my tool tip is where it's supposed to be, and it is within a thou of where it's supposed to be. So I'm happy with that. So now to make the end of this thread cleaner, before I actually start threading, I'm going to use the threading tool itself to put a nice 30-degree chamfer on the end of this workpiece. And it'll just prevent the burr from being so wicked after all the threading's done. So I'm going to do that now. Now I'm going to set the machine lead screw to the pitch that I want. I want 8 threads per inch. So I have to be the handle in position 1 and the quick change gearbox in position 2. So handle, position 1, quick change gearbox, position 2. Now that should be 8 threads per inch, but what we're going to do is we're going to prove that to ourselves before we just start cutting. because the simplest little mistake reading this chart and interpreting it can cause all the work up until that point to be a mess, and all your time threading to be a waste of time if you put the wrong pitch on. So this thread that we're going to cut is going to have to end somehow. And one way that this could happen is if our shaft looks something like this, and we can thread, and then the threading tool just run off into empty space. That would be kind of the easiest and requires the least planning. The next option you could have is where you've machined a groove in your part, the same depth as your thread or a shade deeper, so that you come threading, and then you have all this zone in which to stop your tool. We're going to do another style. What we're going to do, because we don't have this situation, this, as you can imagine, adds weakness to the part by having done this. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our part, we're going to come along and we're going to pop that tool out at exactly the same place every single time. And that'll give us the strongest possible thread. It is the most difficult to do, and you do really have to have your wits about you so you don't crash the whole thing. But I'm going to show you how I set up for that next. So I've got a system I've been using just about forever now. Works really well for me. Again, I'm just sharing what I do. I'm not suggesting you should do something or have to do something, or I'm not asking you to listen to me in any way at all. Just sharing what I do. I always have my crossfeed handle with the handle on the left-hand side and perfectly in the middle. And then the reason I do that is as I'm coming along and the end of the thread's coming and I'm watching for it, I know it's something I've memorized. I have to go down. And I have to do it quick to get that out of there in time so that I don't have a crash. So that is going to remain in this position throughout the whole threading process. Now, if you look in here real close, I'm going to use my compound rest to get my tool in very, very close. And then I'm going to bring my tool over to where I would like my thread to end. And then at this point, I'm going to set a dial up so that my carriage hits the dial about 80 thou, give or take, before 0. And then I'll set this to 0. And that'll be where I stop every single time. So I'll be threading along. I'll see the dial start moving, and I know that the first time the needle comes to a 0, that's exactly where I want to stop. And I'll pop my tool, my crossfeed out, and I'll disengage my split nut all in one motion. So this is exactly where I want my thread to stop lengthwise. And so I've got my dial down here set to 0. Now I'm going to come out of this, and you can see at exactly 80 thou. So as I'm coming up here, dial's going to start to move, and boom, I'm going to stop at that 0. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to prove out that I have my quick change gearbox set up properly. I'm going to get this spinning. I'm going to come in with my compound rest, because remember, this hand wheel is going to spend the whole rest of this process right there. So I'm going to come in till I just touch, then I'm going to come out. I'm going to pick a number on my thread chasing dial once I've engaged it that I want to start at, and then I'll just take a run down the whole thing, and that's going to prove to me, because I can measure it with my thread pitch gauge, it's going to prove to me I have everything set up for the proper pitch. Now, the one last thing I'm actually going to do before I prove that out is I'm going to choose a speed. Now, when this 0 comes around, that dial is going to be coming around pretty quick. So I'm actually going to thread at a significantly lower speed than you would, say, if you had a CNC machine, or even if you were doing it in this kind of machine, but there was different circumstances. But because I want to have this thread blend out perfectly at the exact same place every time, I really want to make sure I hit that 0 every time, and that this comes up and that goes down. And so I'm going to be doing this quite slowly. So I'm going to use my dial, and I'm going to start slow, and I'm going to speed it up until I think I'm going as fast as I can go, but still totally be under control. I cannot do it any faster than that and reliably come out at the same place every time. So I'm actually just going to slow it down one more hair. I'm at 81 RPM. I'm going to try it again. I'm going to see if it's a little more comfortable. Yeah, that's perfect. So I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to touch off. Touched. Now, from now on, this thing is only ever going to go in, and this thing's going to come back to zero every single time. So for my little scratch, I want the smallest possible. I'm just going to go 1 thou, and we'll see what happens here. Now, it is important that I decide what number I'm going to engage on throughout this whole process. Now, I'll explain. I'm sure there's a chart in my manual that would explain to me, because I'm doing such and such a pitch, I can use a variety of different numbers. Sometimes you can use half numbers, and this chart explains all these things to you. A lot of lathes have the chart right on the machine, but this one doesn't. The reason I'm not doing that is these don't engage perfectly on the number every time. Some of them engage a little before or a little behind. Some of the numbers actually, it'll engage just before or just behind. So although I'm going to end up having to spend a little extra time waiting for my single number that I'm using to come around, it'll just save me the possibility of, say, splitting my thread right down the middle because of this thing's little bit of quirkiness. Okay, so we've made our scratch. And indeed, it lines up perfect. So we know we've got it. Now we can start cutting our thread. What was that? So if you take a look right in here, you can see I've taken a couple passes, and this thing has taken a different path every time. Now, I did hear some clicking going on inside the machine, and so I got the manual out, I did some reading, and I'll show you guys what's going on. This arrangement here is like a protection clutch. So if you were to run your carriage into your headstock, this clutch would slip instead of stripping gears and shearing pins. Well, it even says in the manual that you may have to adjust this clutch. Now, this is by far the coarsest thread I've ever tried to cut, like by a long shot. I think the biggest thread I've cut in here so far was a probably half-inch diameter, and this is a 1-inch diameter I'm doing. So this thing was popping out, and it was causing the whole lead screw to get out of sync with the spindle. So I've gone ahead, I've adjusted this clutch. Well, I'm going to spin the part in the chuck around, and we're going to try it again. Well, I've turned this piece around in here. Here's our goitered up mess where we have a whole bunch of different threads going on there. Now, luckily for me, this is just a sample piece that I'm doing for demonstration purposes. If this thread had been on a part, I mean, it could have been devastating. Just imagine putting a day or more work into a part and then you bugger the threads up. I mean, that is minor enough. I could have still threaded over that and ended up with a perfectly usable thread, but just one of the little pitfalls that you don't know is going to get you till it gets you. I'm going to be careful as I'm going here, because before what I noticed was, you know, I'm out here a good ways. I'm not in a hurry, and I just don't want to crash anything. Again, I'm not in a hurry. But anyways, I would engage this, and I think because it was such a coarse thread, it was asking the carriage to move a lot more quickly than it ever had before, and that's what tripped the clutch. And we could hear a little sort of pop, pop, pop when this thing was way out here. Well, now I know like stop. Don't even get up to here because it's gone terribly wrong and you've got to reset it. And we can do that. We can pick up a thread once we've lost it, but yeah, I've adjusted the clutch. I'm hoping this works out now, so here we go again. Right down the middle, just like we like it. Now early on here, I'm going to take quite a bit, like 5 thou side, because we just have the very tip of that tool doing the work. And I know we can get away with that. Then as we get in deeper, there'll be a lot more cutting pressure, and I'll be taking less and less of a cut per side as we get into this farther. And by the end of it, I'll be doing a little, you know, 1/2 thou scrape or something just to clean it up. Ooh, that's a lot. I'll start easing up on that.
Getting greedy.
Yeah, getting greedy. Didn't catch it on camera, but the clutch tripped again. Now, I wasn't in the workpiece, so my workpiece is still fine. But my thread chasing dial no longer means anything because this kept turning and this stopped turning for a couple of seconds there. And so clearly I need to adjust my clutch more. Now, I didn't even know this was a thing until today when I tried to do this coarser pitch. The manual just kind of says, you know, through trial and error, keep adjusting it a little bit. Don't bottom everything out because then you won't have a clutch and you won't have a safety backup. I gave each screw, there's 6 screws, I gave each screw a 1/4 turn and we got a lot farther before it tripped out this try, than we did last try. Got several solid passes in before the clutch tripped out. So I'm gonna see how far these screws go and count, you know, my turns exactly down, and I'll see how far it is to the end, and then I'll decide, am I gonna go another 1/4 turn per screw, or maybe I'll step it up and go a 1/2 turn per screw. I like the idea that there's a safety clutch. I don't want to go so far that I disable it, but this is getting annoying. Now, we can pick that thread back up, like just for laughs. I'll show you how far out of whack it is now. First, I have to get to my 0. So see how far out of whack we are now? If I'd have taken another pass, I hope that's showing on camera, I'd have split that thread just about in 1/3. So now I can fix that because I can get some sideways movement out of my compound rest. So what I'm going to do is, and this is going to screw up this dial. See, now I'm going to have to redo this whole stop point right from scratch because this won't count anymore because that tool is going to move. So with it engaged and going very slowly, what I'm first going to do is I've got a bunch of travel left here that I can use up. This goes all the way to here, so I've got tons of travel there. So I'm going to come out with this hand wheel and in with this one, and you can see I'm getting closer and closer and closer to where I want to be. However, I still want my crossfeed hand wheel to be with my handle on the left-hand side and centered. So I'm actually going to keep doing this, coming out and coming in until I end up over here, hopefully. And then if I can actually make that happen, it might take several revolutions of everything. That would be preferable. So I'm going to try that first.
Hi, Molly. Hi, kitten.
But before we get going on that, I'm going to get this clutch adjusted.
Okay.
It's these 6 set screws around this clutch that do the adjusting. So I'm going to pay super close attention to the rotation of this. I'm going to see how far, before I turned them 1/4, so from there to like there. Now I'm going to go I'm going to go as far as it'll go, count the revolutions, bring it back to 0, and then make a decision on where I want to set all these to. 1 revolution, it's getting tight, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, it stops. So there's the half, and there's the 1. I gave it a 1/4 before, it was better, but not, it didn't work. So I'm gonna give, I don't know, 1/4 or half, honey. What do you think? How much of a pain in the ass is all this?
Let's go 1/4.
Yeah?
I think so. Don't want to get too extreme.
I'm feeling a little more cowboy today, but okay, we'll go 1/4. We'll see what happens. So with the clutch adjusted, now what I have to do is get the thread back tracking again. So I had a bunch of extra space here on my compound rest. So what I've been doing is winding my cross slide out as I'm winding my compound rest in. And because this isn't straight, it's on an angle, I've been getting some sideways travel out of it. And if you come over here and take a look now, I do have my split nut engaged. And I'm poised to contact the right-hand side of that. Now I want to touch the right-hand side. If I were to touch the left-hand side first of the groove in here is what I'm talking about. If I touch the left first, it would forever leave a step on the right-hand side of this thread. But because we're feeding it that way, if I contact the right-hand side first, it'll wipe that clean and it'll do all its new cutting over on the other side. And the 29.5 degree will also help by scraping that clean. So that's in the position I want to be there now. Now, I wasn't able to get my handle perfectly horizontal, but it's plenty close enough. Muscle memory is going to kick in. That's going to work just fine. Now what I need to do is I need to come down to the end here where we've been doing this swoop out style of threading, and every time I come around, right when I hit to the 0, at exactly that second, as quickly as possible, I wind out my cross slide and I disengage my split nut because I'm only a couple revolutions from crashing into the chuck right here. So right there at that swoop out, that's where I'm going to set my dial indicator to 0. I'm going to set it actually, 80 thou before 0. That way when I see it starting to move, I'll know that my big moment's coming up and I've got to be prepared to wind out my cross slide and disengage my split nut. We're all ready to go again. What I'm going to do on this first pass, or what I did with my tool in place over here, is I just brought my compound in until I could ever so gently feel it touching something, and that's where I left it set. So we're gonna, you might see a thou or two, I think, I hope, is all you're gonna see come off of there. And then once we've, checked this out, then we'll start taking passes again and we'll carry on with the threading. Didn't catch it on the first time, came in a little more. There we're just touching and we're on the right hand side, just where we wanna be. So I guess that last quarter turn on the set screws on that clutch adjustment didn't do it. We were threading along. Again, it didn't happen when I was in the workpiece, so that's great. But the clutch tripped again. No idea why. I think,
We should have just went cowboy.
Should have gone cowboy. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So let's do some adjustments and try again.
And it's tripping so easily. I can almost just, I don't know why, but I'm sure it's because of how coarse the pitch is because there's more pressure through the whole system because of that. Okay, so off camera, I've readjusted the clutch like I meant it this time. I'm hoping that does it for us. I've retracked my thread through moving my cross slide in and out and my compound rest in and out, and thereby gain side-to-side travel, got it tracked back in. I've reset the 0 on my dial that when I reach my transition where I pop it out at the end, I'm back at the 0 where I should be. And I've got everything set now, I believe, for another pass. So again, we're going to be hugging the right-hand side of this thread because there's lots of room over here. As the thread gets deeper and wider, it's going to be getting wider this way because of this angle. So I'm starting by hitting the right-hand side of the thread. That way, in the end, I know it's going to be scraped up nice and clean, and I won't have any steps or transitions in there because I really would like this to be a good thread if possible. So guys, that safety clutch on the lead screw tripped again, and I'm pretty much fed up with that thing. To be honest, I've been a machinist my entire life. I've never run a single machine that had a safety anything on it. You could run every one to an end and break it. So I just disabled that clutch. I just put all those little set screws as tight as I could on those little springs and pushing those little balls into those little detents, and now there's no safety clutch, but that's fine. I'm super comfortable with that. I'm just not going to crash my machine, and we should, we should be able to carry on with some basic work here. So I've gone ahead, I've retracked into my thread. I've got that set back up again. I've reset my dial for my stop point for where I swoop out of my cut, and we're just going to carry on now. I did favor again the back side of the thread, so that I would be certain as the tool advances this way that the backside doesn't get forgotten and it's got a nice consistent surface without steps and so on. So now we can carry on and get back to cutting this thread. Well, we didn't have the camera actually going at the time, but I was mid-pass and the motor just stalled out. I'm only advancing my compound rest about a thou every pass. I find that to be pretty ridiculous. This thing has so little power at low RPMs. It really is incapable of doing a proper job of cutting this thread. If I speed this any quicker, where I'm pulling out here all in one, quick motion, the dial will be traveling too fast. I won't be able to do it. I'll end up crashing the machine. So really frustrating. We've had that clutch issue, and now it simply doesn't have the power to take a pass. The thread's pretty darn close to being done, but the last time that the clutch tripped out on me, and of course I had to retrack my thread, I had to reset my end. Well, my end is getting very deep now, and so what ended up happening was I didn't pick the perfect place for a 0, and you can see it all packed up, had a little crash there, broke the tip off my threading insert. Really getting disappointed trying to do this simple job. So as frustrated as I am with this thing, I'm not gonna just give up. I am going to attempt to finish this thread. However, I'm gonna have to spin it faster, so it'll have more power. And I won't be able to stop using my dial. We just talked about that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my part off tool, and I'm gonna carve a nice deep groove in, and that'll be where I can disengage my split nut lever when I'm in that groove. And we'll see if we can't actually finish this thing off and salvage some of our pride here. So the single depth of this thread is 94 thou. So I'm going to make this groove 100 thou deep, and I'm going to make it plenty wide because I want to thread at a pretty good speed. That's the only way I'm going to get the power out of this machine required you know, to do this job. So I'm not happy about this, but this is our fallback situation here. This is the tip that broke when the motor stalled, and this is the tip that broke when I didn't position my pullout at the end correctly. And so going to switch this tip again, get a fresh one in there, see if we can't finish this thread off. So making some lemonade out of lemons. Here's our thread. It does in fact work. Decent fit there. I'm not happy about having to have done this. Not happy about having broken 2 tips off my threading tool. The weak motor, super disappointing. That goofy clutch thing, that was really disappointing. All in all, this was really disappointing. But you know what? We're sharing the wins and the losses with you guys. And hey, now we know. I mean, this machine, this is 8 threads per inch. 1 inch 8 is what I was trying to do. This machine will go 1 notch farther, down to 7 threads per inch. I don't think there's a hope in hell you could cut an 1.25 inch diameter thread with 7 threads per inch on here. Just don't think that would happen. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed. I know I didn't, but please like, share, subscribe. See you next time.